So we'll talk about this service today, which is Network Security Group. Now, what Network Security Group is, this is similar to ACL. ACL is access control list. These are typically set of rules which governs communication, which governs traffic. So those rules basically decide if there's a traffic which is incoming to the network, will that traffic be allowed or discarded? Traffic is nothing but IP packets. If you had seen that video yesterday about how internet works. So let's say traffic, you know, for the purpose of this training. So if there is an incoming traffic to the network, they will inspect that traffic and they will either allow it or deny it based on the rules that are configured inside. Similarly, if there is an outbound traffic from one of the VMs, then they will also look for that traffic, inspect it. If it is allowed, they will allow it. If it is denied, as per the rules which are configured, it will deny it. So they are just gatekeeper, and they basically govern the communication. So that's network security group is, which is similar to access control list in on-premises networking. A network security group has inbound rules and outbound rules. Inbound security rules basically controls all the incoming traffic to the network, and outbound security rules controls the outbound traffic from the network. That outbound traffic could be to another VM within the network, or it could also be to the internet. So example, let's understand this image. This image has got three subnets, subnet 1, subnet 2, and subnet 3. In subnet 1, you have two virtual machines. In subnet 2, you have one virtual machine. And in subnet 3, you have one virtual machine. Okay. Now they have applied NSG at the subnet level. So basically there are two NSGs here. One NSG is applied at the network interface card of the VM, and the other NSG is applied at the subnet level. So another learning for you, NSGs can be applied either at the virtual machine NIC level or at the network level. I'm sorry, subnet level. Similarly, if you look here, here you only have one NSG which is applied at the VM NIC in the subnet 2. In subnet 3, there is no NSG. So when there is no NSG, this VM can receive and send traffic without any restriction. When there is an NSG at the NIC level, whenever there is an incoming traffic, it will first come to this NSG, who will then inspect this traffic with the rules which are configured in the inbound security rules. If that traffic is allowed, it will let it go there. In the first example, where the NSG is configured both at the subnet as well as VM NIC level, when there is an inbound traffic from the internet, or let's say from any other VM, let's say this VM2 tries to communicate with VM1, right? So when VM2 tries to communicate with VM1, for VM2, it's an outbound traffic. VM2 is sending some data. It's an outbound traffic, but for VM1, it's an inbound traffic. If at the VM1 NSG, if you have denied the communication from VM1, VM2, then it will not reach to the VM1 at all. It will be dropped at the NSG level. So this is the functionality of NSG. Now, when you have NSG at both NIC as well as subnet level, then how it works? So let's say there is an incoming traffic from the internet. It reaches to the NSG, which is, it will first go, it will first come to the NSG, which is at the subnet level. This subnet, and both the VMs will inherit that NSG. All the VMs in the subnet will inherit the NSG at the subnet level. Now, when this traffic comes from the internet, and this traffic is coming on port 80, somebody is trying this. These VMs are web servers. They are hosting web services. Somebody from the internet is trying to connect to these web servers. And so that could be your user. But at the NSG, which is at the subnet level, that traffic is not allowed. You have denied any incoming traffic from port 80 from the internet. Then the traffic will be dropped then and there at the subnet level. It will never come to the second stage, the second security, which is NSG2. It will never reach here because it will be denied here also. But let's assume that at the NSG1, at the subnet level, the traffic is allowed on port 80. But at the NSG2, when it reaches the NSG1 at the subnet level, it is inspected. Yes, it has an inbound security rule which allows traffic, incoming traffic on port 80. It will allow it. But the moment it reaches to the NSG2, which is at the VM link level, where you have an inbound security rule which actually denies any traffic on port 80, then it will be then the traffic will be dropped here, which means it will never reach to the VM. So if there are two NSGs, then the NSG will deny rule will always take precedence, because deny will take precedence. If there is a deny at NSG1, the traffic will be discarded then and there. It will never move ahead. So deny always take preference when there are two NSGs sitting, when there are two NSGs working in parallel. If there is only one NSG, then it depends on the number of rules. Enough of theory, let's do the practical. All of these will be clear to you. So let's go back to our virtual machines. Now, when we go back to our virtual machines, as I said, NSG Network Security Group, anything to do with networking. Your virtual machine overview blade has 100 options. Microsoft keeps on changing these options, adding more capabilities. You need to remember the thumb rule. Anything to do with networking will always be looked into networking option only. So you open your virtual machine, you click on networking under settings, and you see this to your right. Now what it shows you, the first thing is network interface. It shows you that this virtual machine has this network interface. Then it also shows you inbound rules, inbound port rules, outbound port rules, application security group, and load balancing. Right now, this is showing inbound port rules. These are outbound port rules. This is application security group, and this is load balancing. So no load balancing, no application security group, but we have inbound and outbound rules. Now these are the NSGs. So if you look carefully, it says network security group, which is the VM name hyphen NSG attached to network interface, which is 1167 VM name, which is this, impacts 0 subnet 1 network interface. So this basically tells you that on this network interface, this network security group is attached, and these are the rules in the network security group. This is inbound port rule. This is outbound port rule. So that's NSGs. Now, let's say we want to disable some traffic on the VM. We can configure it through the NSG. Now, let's say on my VM, I want to disable the internet. I don't want my employees to browse the internet. NSGs can only allow or deny rule based on the TCP IP port. They are not intelligent enough to actually read the actual request and and allow or deny the traffic based on the content, based on the FQDN, based on the keyword. If you need that level of capability, you need a firewall, you need a proxy server. NSGs only inspect at the TCP IP port level. So that's what NSG is, which means that if you need a full-fledged security for your network, you cannot rule out the possibilities of a firewall. Now the firewall services or solutions which are available, they are next generation firewall solutions, and they have proxy, they have content filtering, they have keyword filtering based on keyword, based on FQDN, based on public IP, based on whatnot. So they are intelligent devices. They have all the capabilities. You can still configure NSGs in your network. Why? How it helps you over here. So if you look this image, look at this. This is how you are protecting your virtual machine, which sits here. This is known as this is the subnet defense in depth. Defense in depth is a terminology which has been given by NIST, National Institute of Cybersecurity Standards and Technology. So they said that gone are the days when organization would only protect their perimeter network, by deploying some firewall solution and feel that if they are inspecting the traffic at the perimeter, and if they are only allowing the traffic which is trusted, which is legitimate, to the next layer, which is your DMZ and trusted layer, trusted network, then there is no security risk. But it is not applicable anymore. Defense in depth approach says that you should protect each and every layer of your network and every minute service that you are using inside. So if you look at defense in depth, it starts from internet. When the traffic comes from the internet, the first layer that it need to pass through is DDoS protection. This layer examines if that traffic is coming from a legitimate user or from a hacker. That's what this layer is doing. When it leaves that layer, then it reaches to the load balancer. Load balancer distributes that traffic to a virtual appliance. Virtual appliance could be a firewall here. It's a firewall, it's a next generation firewall, or it's a native firewall. Now, once again, the traffic is inspected here based on the rules and policies which are configured. When it leaves here, then there is another defense layer of defense, which is subnet NSG. So once it leaves the virtual appliance, the firewall, then this layer will take care of it. Now, if at this layer you have configured not to allow any traffic based on a specific port, the packet will be dropped here. Let's say that the traffic leaves this layer also, reaches to the next layer, which is VM or NIC NSG. So this layer it is allowed, but on this layer, if you have denied, then also it gets dropped. Let's say the traffic also leaves this layer, then there is another layer which is VM layer, where you also have a firewall on a VM, which is antivirus, anti-malware system, Microsoft Defender in case of Microsoft. So it reaches there. Let's say so this is how you're protecting your services in virtual machine, that at every layer you have a defense mechanism in place. Let's say even if it reaches here on the virtual machine, you also are encrypting your data. So you are actually encrypting the data on the disk of your virtual machine. So even if there is a virus, or there is a malware or a spyware or any sort of security threat, that encryption will take care of it. So that's how you're protecting each and every layer of your network and making sure that your crown jewels or your virtual machines services are protected. That's known as defense in depth model. And I've just given you a very high overview of this model. This has more to it. I'm saying people take months to understand defense in depth model. So the reason I explained this model to you at a very high level, because I wanted to talk about the service NSG. So let's say you want to, now I'll just talk about a couple of use cases of NSGs. Let me bring up my another slide, which is whiteboard, and I'll give you a perfect use case for NSG. If it is for outbound traffic, a perfect use case for NSG is that you want to block the internet, you want to block some outbound traffic on a specific port. These are the use cases. If it is an incoming, traffic, then the use cases are like this. Let's say you have a 3-tier application. That's the perfect use case for your NSG. You have a 3-tier application. It's my website, cloudexperts.com. I've configured this application or web portal in a 3-tiered approach. So I have a web server, I have an application server, I have a database server, and they are hosted in their respected segments, respected subnets. I also have a Bastion host through which my Azure admin actually connects to the network, and then they connect to these VMs to do administrative work. If you look at these, on the top, if you look carefully, from the web server to the database server, there is a cross. I'm intentionally denying all the traffic from web to database. Why? To safeguard my application. I do not see a use case wherein web server needs to communicate with database. There is a middle tier in between, which has been kept intentionally so that if this web server is compromised, it does not spread that infection or malware to my database in any case, because web server is internet facing. There could be a hacker on the internet who will somehow take control of my web server. But because of this NSG, because of this security rule, that hacker would not be able to reach my database. Because on the database, I have an incoming rule, in inbound security rule, which is denying all incoming connection from the web subnet, all incoming traffic, either from the entire subnet or from this VM. That's the perfect use case of NSG, which is what organizations use it for. They actually deny inter-subnet, they deny or allow inter-subnet communication using NSG. So that's for the inbound. And for the outbound, as I said, my database is crucial to my application. And I do not see a use case for my database server to connect to the internet. I have my admin who is there. If this database server needs any update, patches, or anything of that sort, my Azure admin will actually do that activity. But I don't want this database to actually connect to the internet. So what I will do, I will create an outbound rule, outbound security rule in the NSG for this database VM or the entire subnet, and I will block the access to the internet. That way I can protect my environment. So we'll do both. Let's just do this activity. So let's say this web server, we don't have a database server, we only have one VM. Concept remains the same, be it database, be it web server. I'll show you how to block the internet, how to block the outbound communication from the VM first. All right. So but before we do that, let's first validate whether or not outbound is allowed. And also let's validate what these rules are. So let's start with inbound port rules. Now understand these rules carefully, guys. It says priority. What does this priority means? Priority means when you create a rule, you assign a priority to it. It starts with 100 and it goes up to 65,000, 65,001, let's say. 65,500. It goes until there. You already have 3 default incoming port rules. Now, these are default rules. Whenever you provision a VM, if an NSG is getting provisioned along with that VM, you will find these 3 default rules there for sure. And similarly, there are 3 outbound default rules also. What these default rules says? The first rule, with the priority is 65,000, it says allow VNet inbound. So it basically says that allow VNet inbound basically means this is my VNet. So if there is an inbound traffic in the VNet, then please allow that traffic. From where? From on which port? Any port. Protocol any. Source virtual network, destination virtual network. So it basically says that within this virtual network, if there is any incoming traffic to any of these VMs, please allow it. In other words, within a virtual network, all VMs can communicate with each other. So this NSG is actually making it possible. Virtual network to virtual network allow. Then there is another rule for inbound which says allow load balancer inbound. When you provision a load balancer, then this rule is for that load balancer, that from the load balancer, destination any. Within the virtual network, if there is any VM, and if the load balancer is source, and if load balancer is sending the traffic, then the VM should accept it. That's allowed once again. Then there is another rule which says deny all inbound. So the rule says deny all inbound, and the rule says protocol any, port any, which basically says that if there is any inbound, which is from any port, any protocol, any source, any destination, please deny it. So that's the another rule. Now this rule is applicable at the internet level because it says port any, protocol any, source any, destination any. So when it says source any, destination any, when it says source any means internet. So it is, in other words, it is saying that if there is any traffic from the internet which is coming to any destination means any VM in my network or in my subscription, please deny it. Now, if you say that if this is the rule, then how am I able to take RDP of my VM? I'm sending, when I take RDP, I'm actually sending an outbound. I'm actually sending an outbound traffic from my laptop, which is an inbound traffic for the VM on port 3389. Then how I'm doing it? Because of this additional rule, priority 300. So another thumb rule: lowest is the priority, highest is the precedence. You have a default blanket rule that denies all incoming traffic from internet. That's default blanket rule. Then you have created a custom rule with low priority stating that only 3389 should be allowed. So that's how you are playing with NSGs. You put a blanket rule for deny, then you create custom allow rules basis on your requirement. So you've created this RDP rule which says if there is a traffic from any source to any destination in this network, source any means internet, on TCP 3389, TCP protocol 3389 port, then please allow it. And because of this rule, you're able to RDP your VMs. If I just remove this rule, your VMs will not accept RDP connection. Your VMs will not, you will not be able to take remote of your VM because this NSG will drop that packet. Why? Because the moment you delete this rule, this one will take effect. The last rule will take effect. And the last rule says deny all incoming from any source, any destination. Is it making sense, guys?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Similarly, the outbound rules. We have three outbound rules. The first outbound rule says if there is any VNet outbound, which means if there is any outbound traffic from the virtual network to the virtual network, any virtual machine in the networks sends any traffic to other virtual machine in the network, please allow. Other rule, allow internet outbound. The other rule says if there is an internet outbound, if there is any outbound traffic to the internet from any source to any destination, please allow. So destination is internet. So by default, internet is allowed on Azure VMs because of this rule. Then there is another rule which says 65,500 that deny all outbound. And it says, please deny all outbound from everywhere. But if you look carefully, this is 65,500 and this is 65,001. Which one is lowest priority? Which one is lowest priority? Out of these two, which has the lowest priority?
65001.
Right. And that's the reason it is taking precedence. So you have a blanket deny rule. But because you have another rule with low priority, which allows outbound to the internet, that's the reason this takes priority. So when there are two rules that conflicts with each other, then the rule with lowest priority will take precedence. I'll just show you how it works. I'll connect to my VM. I'm lucky that I have my Bastion host. So I'll quickly use my Bastion host to connect to my VM. Did I turn on my VMs? See, stop deallocated. That's the reason it was coming. Let me turn on my VM first. I'll turn on the other VM also. Okay, I'll hit reconnect. All right, I'm connected to my VM. I'll just close this and I'll open Internet Explorer. I'll open a couple of websites, let's say yahoo.com. Facebook, Gmail, see, I'm able to connect to the internet. I'm able to, browse all of these websites on this VM, which is SharePoint Web 1. So this is my VM, SharePoint Web 1, and things are absolutely working fine on this VM. I'll go to the networking tab once again. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to deny internet on this VM. So that's how we deny internet. There are two options. You already have an NSG rule with allow internet. What you can do, you can just open this rule. I'm say these are default rules, you cannot touch it. So what I'm going to do, I'll add one more outbound rule, and now I will deny the internet. See how I deny the internet? In the source. Now, if you want to deny the internet from a specific virtual machine in the subnet, then you can, in the source, you can select its IP address. When you put source as any, it applies to all the VMs. Otherwise, you can put the IP address for the source, and you can actually put the IP address of the VM from which you want to deny the internet. So let's say I want to put the IP address of the VM, which is 192.168.1.4. That's the IP address I can see here. So I put the IP address that I want to deny. I want to put some rules on this VM basically. I'm not deciding what I want to do, allow or deny. Then it says source port range. I'll select star. Star means whatever port I will use on this VM to send an outbound traffic, that's star. Then destination. Destination says any. If I put any could be anything, but I want to only block the internet. So if I want to block the internet only, then I can select the service tag option. I'll select the service tag in destination, and then the service tag, these are the service tags. So I'll select the internet. Now, the moment I selected the internet, I'm done here. Then I need to select the priority. The allow internet is 65,001. I need to select a priority which is below this. So I can even select 64,900. But it says that when you create a custom NSG, you will need to select a value between these. You're not allowed to select these port, this priority. So I'll select, let's say 110, which is less than this one. And then in the name, I can put the name that deny internet. This is just for your understanding purpose. And in the description, I can type, this is a custom NSG which denies internet connectivity from SharePoint web server. That's my SharePoint web server, and I'll add the rule. Okay, I did one mistake. I forgot to select the deny, but this rule get created. Then I'll just go back and hit the deny. So the rule is getting created now, the outbound rule created. I'll just need to refresh my screen. All right, the rule is created, which says deny internet. I'll click on the rule once again, and in the action, I'll select deny. and then save it. You can also do it on your system, guys, simultaneously. Now I've just saved this rule. Done. The rule is saved. Let's see once again. It says priority 110, name deny internet, port 8080, protocol. Okay, so one more mistake. On the port, I will need to select any. So protocol any, source this, destination internet, and deny. What it will do, it will only deny the internet from this port only. If from this port I'll send outbound traffic, then it will deny. So I'll need to fix this one as well. And in the port, I will need to put star. Star means any, because there could be some smarter employee in the organization who will use a proxy server to connect to the internet. That's the reason I'm putting star. Star means all port. Now, even if they try to connect to the internet using a proxy, proxy which is available, they won't be able to do that. So port should be any. Now this is done. So deny internet, port any, protocol any, source this VM, destination internet, deny. Now let's go back to our RDP. Here's the RDP. All of these websites are up and running. I'll just refresh the page and see if they come back again. So I'm refreshing for Yahoo. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I actually refreshed my browser, but that's okay. Let's do it once again. I'll connect to the Bastion host once again. All right. So what I'll do, I'll refresh the browser. I'll refresh the Yahoo page. I'll refresh Facebook. I'll refresh Gmail, and I'll refresh MSN and see. None of these websites will come up now. It will continue to say waiting, and then it will say cannot be displayed. Can't reach the page. See? Can't reach the page for all the websites. Because the NSG is taking effect now. This VM is sending an outbound traffic for Yahoo is 443 port, HTTPS. For Facebook, it is also 443. This is also 443 because most of the websites are using secure communication. So this VM is actually sending an outbound traffic on the internet on 443. And I have created an NSG which denies all outbound traffic to internet from any port. That's the reason this internet is not working on the VM because of these NSG rules, the one that I have created here. Because of this rule. And this rule 65,500 says all outbound. This is actually allowing all outbound, but because of this rule, the outbound is getting denied. Is it making sense, guys?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay. Now, if I just click on this rule once again, and I'll just change the action from deny to allow and save it. See, the internet will stop, will start working. So I'm just changing the okay. So the action is changed. Now it doesn't happen real quick. Sometimes it takes 2 to 3 minutes to synchronize the changes. So I'll go back to the VM and now I'll refresh the page once again and all the websites will come up. See, they've started to come up. Internet is working once again on the VM. I'll come back and change it to deny. It will stop working. So this is a typical NSG rule that you will find in the production environment. wherein they will purposely deny internet from the VMs. Typically the servers, because there is absolutely no use case for servers to go over the internet and browse something. You don't want that to happen. It could bring in some security, loopholes. So you will find it typically there. However, the best practice for NSG is that you should apply NSG at the subnet level. Why you should apply NSG at the subnet level? Because what is the purpose of segmentation? The purpose of segmentation was to break a larger network into smaller networks so that you can put workloads of similar nature. If you put workloads of similar nature, all web servers, all app servers, all DB servers, then their traffic requirements will also be similar. Security requirements will also be similar. So that's where you can actually apply NSG at the subnet level. So all the virtual machines inside that subnet will inherit that NSG, and they will inherit those rules also. This will save a lot of administrative overhead for you. If you manage NSGs at the VM level, and if there are 300 VMs, you will manage 300 NSGs. And inside those NSGs, you will have multiple inbound and outbound rules. Your life will become next to hell. So the best practice is to apply it at the subnet level so that you have less number of NSGs, you have less rules to manage. Complexity opens security loopholes. Always remember this. So your purpose is to simplify technology so that loopholes are not there. Any question on NSG part? Now I will also do the inbound part. So this was the outbound that we just tried. Now let's do an inbound. So in order to do inbound, we need one more virtual machine, or we can do inbound here as well. Are networks paired with each other? These two networks, guys?
Yeah.
Yep, they are
Yes.
paired. Great. So they are paired, right? Which basically means that from web server 1, I can actually ping the web server 2, and I can also take RDP of it. Let's see if that is happening. So from this web server, I'll open command prompt and I'll ping the other web server, which is in the other network. Great, it's working. It is accepting ping request. I'll also do MSTSC. Yes, it is giving me the command prompt 192.168.2.4. All right. It is returning the credential page, which means the server has accepted incoming request from my VM, outbound from my VM, but inbound to that server on port 3389. And this behavior is expected because we have these two servers hosted in two different virtual networks, but those two virtual networks are paired with each other. Is it making sense, guys?
Yes.
Okay. Let's disable this communication through NSG. So I'll go to now there are two ways that I have. I can either create an outbound rule on this web server to actually deny the traffic to the other web server in the other network, or I can create an inbound rule on the other web server to deny all the incoming traffic from this web server, whichever way you find appropriate. So let's do both. Let's create an outbound rule first. So we go to the virtual machine, SharePoint 1, networking, outbound port rule, and now we add one more outbound port rule. So we say source any, let's be specific, 192.168.1.4. That's fine. Source port, any port that I'm sending the traffic. Then destination. In the destination, I'll type the IP address 192.168.2.4. So that's the destination, my other web server, custom destination port. I'm typing any, that I want to block all outbound traffic to that web server, and protocol any, and then I'll type deny priority. Now priority is 120. If I take 120 priority, then let's see what will happen. At 110, the outbound deny internet. So I can take this priority. There is absolutely no challenge. Deny outbound to share SHP web 2. I can put similar information in the description. That's it. Done. So look at the rule once again. The rule is deny outbound to that server. I'm saying this name doesn't make any difference. You can put any name. What difference makes these fields? So port any, protocol any, source is this, destination is this. 1.4 to 2.4, deny all traffic. Let's go back to here and you will see the traffic is now denied. So if I just do the ping once again, it should not work. And it is not working if you see. It's not responding now. Because the NSG rule in the outbound security rule is taking effect now. And if I do MSTSC, let's say I minimize this, cancel it, and once again hit connect, now it will not connect. See, it's not connecting. The outbound traffic which the server is actually sending is getting blocked at the NSG level itself. Is it making sense, guys?
Yeah. So,
Yes.
so does that mean that this particular activity supersedes that peering which we have done amongst like between the two networks?
See,
Sorry.
peering across the network.
Yeah.
If that network has 100 VMs, they can communicate with each other. But you have enabled a specific rule that is only denying some traffic between two servers. So it will, yes, take priority. Peering is like enabling communication. You are enabling blanket communication between the networks, but inside the network, you have some specific requirements wherein you have denied some outbound traffic from one server to another server. So yes, it takes preference. And similarly, what I can do, instead of doing this activity here, instead of creating an outbound port rule, I can now deny this. I can now delete this rule quickly. Okay, the rule is deleted. I'll go back to my web server once again, and I'll take the remote and see if it is working. See, it has started. It is working now. It has just given me the prompt. And if I go to the ping will also start working now because that rule is deleted. Now, since there is no rule which is denying that communication, the peering is taking effect. So that's how we are doing it. Now let's do this activity on the server itself. So as I said, when you create an outbound rule, an inbound rule for it is not created. So I can do this activity now once again. I can go back to the other server, this web 2, and on the web 2, I can create one inbound port rule. I have this choice. Either I can block an outbound traffic from the source, or I can block incoming traffic at the destination. So I'm adding an inbound rule. The inbound rule says source. I'll select the IP address. So that's the IP address 1.4. Source port, any port. Destination, I'll select this VM. Then it says service. Once again, destination port, I'll select any port, then the action deny. Now, you need to be a bit careful with this. It says 310 priority. 310 priority. If I create this rule at 310 priority, see what will happen.
RDP will allow only.
Okay, you will see what will happen. Then I'll talk. Then I'll talk about it. Let this rule get created first. Okay, the rule is created. Now the rule says 310 that any port, any protocol, if the source is this VM and if the destination is this VM, please deny. That's what this rule says. Let's go to our web server remote once again and let's see if I'm able to get the response. I'm getting the response. Now let's do a ping also. But ping is getting timed out. So ping is getting timed out, but the RDP is working. RDP is working, ping is getting timed out. Why? This says deny all communication, and the priority is 310. And that's the reason it is denying all the communication. Ping is not working, but there is another conflicting rule. And that conflicting rule says with lower priority that please allow RDP to source any destination, any. That's the reason your RDP is working, because you have a conflicting rule with lowest priority, lower priority, which is taking the precedence. And RDP is working, but other than RDP, any other communication is not working. So your ping stopped working. If you send traffic to any other port, it will not work. RDP will continue to work because the priority is low. So that's where you learned about the priority as well. Any question on this, guys? You need to practice it, then you will understand it more. However, this is very simple, that priority, lower priority, higher precedence. That's the thumb rule here. And you can block traffic blanket by putting source and destination any, or you can be specific in your approach by providing the specific IP of the VM and block the communication.
Raghu, one question. So why can't we do this at virtual network level? Like here we are doing like VM by VM, you know. So suppose we don't want anyone from our virtual network to, let's say, access internet. So is that possible?
No, you cannot apply NSG at the network level. You can apply NSG at the subnet level. So your subnet is also a network. It's just that it's a smaller network, right? It's a segmented network. From the bigger address space, you have created a smaller network. Now imagine if I block internet at the virtual network level. This is not required actually. There could be n number of virtual machines in your organization which needs connectivity to the internet. How can I block that? Web servers, they need internet connectivity. You cannot block them. For any incoming request that comes from the internet, there is an outbound that goes. So if you block at the network level, your application will stop working then and there. What if you have connectivity with on-premises network? All the traffic to on-premises network will work that moment only, because that VPN, in that VPN traffic is traversing over the internet. So that will work. That's the reason you don't have that rule at the network layer, at the virtual network level, but you have rules at the subnet level. So at the subnet level, you can do it. And you can also do it at the VM level. But as I said, instead of doing it at the VM level and then managing multiple rules, you should do it at the subnet level. And you can only do it at the subnet level when you put VMs of similar nature in a subnet, which requires similar security controls and similar security configurations. then it is possible. And that's the reason we did segmentation when we did planning yesterday. That's the reason we created multiple subnets so that we can put workloads of similar nature and we can apply security rules. Any more question on this, guys? I'll remove this rule. No, not this one.
So, so even though we're looking at this from the virtual machine networking, we're still looking at the NSG rules, right? And therefore you could have, as long as they're on the same subnet, you could add the VM from the network, you could add the network interface from VM2 to the NSG. Is that, would that be right?
See, when the VMs are in the same network, they can communicate with each other without any trouble, without
Yes.
any restriction, because default rule is there. This default rule is making it possible. But as I said, if you look here, I have a specific requirement that I don't want my web subnet to communicate with database subnet.
Yes.
Where I can put a rule. I can either put an outbound security rule at web layer, web subnet layer, to block all the outbound towards the database, or I can put an inbound security rule at the database subnet to block all incoming traffic from the web subnet.
Yeah, sure. It's just that when we created these virtual machines yesterday, that we've got a network security group for each one.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I'm just sort of thinking. So if you only had the one NSG in your resource group, can you group as for what you've got there for your rules across?
Right. Yep. So that's what we're going to do now, Henry. Now we will do away with this approach of allocating
Okay.
at the VM level. What we are going to do, we are going to create NSGs, and then we will associate them at the subnet level. After
Okay.
that,
Yes.
we will create a VM, and we will not select NSG. And the VM will inherit the NSG from the subnet. That's what we are going to do.
Okay. That starts to make sense. Yeah. That's what I was just trying to tie it back to from what we've done and what we were talking about. That's great.
So that's exactly what we are going to do now. So let's create an NSG. So how do we create NSG? We'll type network and it will show network security group. And if you see, there are two NSGs right now, which got created while we provisioned our VMs. Now we'll create one NSG, custom NSG. So I'll select the resource group as my training resource group. Name, I can put this is my web subnet NSG. East US will be my region. Tag, I don't need to put. I'm not putting. If you wish, you can. And I'll create.
As part of exercise yesterday, we created a one VM in Europe region. Can we delete that, or will we be using that?
Shut down that VM. We need it. All right, the NSG is created. I'll go back to NSGs and I'll see that NSG here, web subnet NSG. Okay. Now I need to associate this NSG to the web subnet. First of all, let's see the rules here. So if I click on the NSG, this is how it opens up. These are my inbound rules and outbound rules. And if you look carefully, it is the same rule, same three default rules for inbound and outbound. So these are the rules at the NSG. Then what I will do, I will need to associate it. So I can click on subnets here and I can see there is no subnet. Under subnet, nothing is displayed. So I can click on associate. And then I'll select the virtual network, which is VNet 1. Then I'll select the subnet to which I want to associate it. So I'll select my web subnet because this is my web subnet NSG, and I hit OK. Now the NSG is associated to the subnet.
Could you add more subnets at this stage to this same
Yep,
NSG?
you can add more subnets also. There is absolutely no challenge. You can add more subnets. However, this is against the best practice.
Sure,
If
sure.
if you associate this NSG to the application subnet also, then how will you put security rules? Because web
Yeah.
and would require separate security controls. So what you
True.
can do, if you have more web subnets in your network, which are only hosting web servers, then you can associate it. So one NSG can be associated to multiple subnets, right? However,
Yeah, okay.
a subnet at any point in time will have only one NSG associated to it. So example, this web subnet. Now I have associated this NSG rule to the web subnet. I cannot associate any other NSG to this web subnet. So a subnet will have only one NSG at any point of time associated to it, but one NSG can be associated to multiple subnets. Okay. Now let's say, can I associate this NSG to my other virtual network web subnet? Yes. For example, this is my other virtual network, and this virtual network also has a web subnet, so I can associate it. That is possible. Now I can put rules in this NSG, which will be applicable to both the subnets, and these two subnets will be hosting web servers, but they are actually across two virtual networks. So NSGs have no restriction at the virtual network layer. NSG is a separate service whose job is to inspect the traffic, allow or deny it based on the rules which is configured. So I've associated these two. Now, if I go back to the VM, you will see one change there. Now I'll click on one of the VMs. And if I go to the networking tab, you will see one change, which is, if you see here, it says the network security group web subnet is attached to the subnet, which is impacts two subnets and zero network interfaces. So which basically means that this VM now has two NSGs. This is the first NSG, web subnet NSG, which is associated at the subnet level, and it is impacting two subnets because we have attached it to two subnets. And then there is another NSG which is at the NIC level. So this is first NSG, this is second NSG. This VM has got two NSGs now, one at the subnet level, other at the NIC level. And these are the inbound rules, these are the outbound rules. Now this sort of configuration will create conflict in future. So what we do, the moment you associate an NSG at the subnet level, you would want to remove the NSG which is associated at the NIC level, so that there is no conflict in the rules. So that's what you can do. Now, typically, when you create a virtual machine in a production environment, you will not associate NSG at the NIC level. You will always select the subnet, and whatever NSG is associated at the subnet level will take effect. So now we'll create one more VM in this web subnet, and I'll show you how to get the NSG on that VM. So we'll go to virtual machines. We'll click on create VM. And now I'll select my resource group, virtual machine name. Let's say I'll just type the name of the VM, sample VM. Okay, availability zone, everything is same. Username, Azure user. Password is that. Everything is same. Then comes the networking tab, disk tab. Disk tab we don't bother because we want to see something else. Here you will find the NSG part. Okay, so I'll select my network and I'll select my subnet, let's say web subnet. The public IP, I don't need it, so I'll keep it none because I have Western host. Then it says NIC Network Security Group. Now this is where if you see none. Why it is says none? Because the moment you select web subnet, when Azure says there is a best practice, Azure also synchronizes that best practice in the portal itself. So the moment you select web subnet, it has these three options: none, basic, advanced. By default, none is selected. Why none is selected? Because it says the selected subnet, web subnet, is already associated to a network security group, which is web subnet NSG. We recommend managing connectivity to this virtual machine via the existing network security group instead of creating a new one here. That's the reason it says none. If you click basic, the moment you click basic, then it will create an NSG for the VM. So that's the reason we'll select none, and the NSG which is already associated at the subnet level will take effect here. That's how we avoid it. But if I select app subnet, then I can select basic and it will not give me any warning because there is absolutely no NSG associated at the app subnet level. That's the reason the behavior is like this. The moment I select web subnet, it will be null. And it will give me this information also that you really don't need any NSG. Is it making sense, guys?
Yes.
Okay. I will not provision this VM. That's all I wanted to show you, the NSG part. So that is all about NSGs, guys.